I'm at Tyndale University College with the Ravi Zacharias Summer School, and I'm thrilled to have Margaret Manning here today. Margaret is part of the speaking team and also part of the writing team at RZIM. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, Margaret, sometimes when people think about apologetics and when they think about sharing their faith, they get all nervous, they get upset, and they think, I haven't really read any apologetics books, I don't have a PhD, let alone a degree in this, and I believe the Bible, but I don't think I can defend it particularly well. But you're into something that you call conversational evangelism. So that's kind of like a little sprig of hope in a sea of apologetics for a lot of people, I think.
Well, I don't have a PhD either.
Okay, there you go.
So I'm just like everybody else in that sense. And I really think the key to sharing our faith is building relationships with people, getting to know them. Everybody wants to tell their story. And sometimes when people ask apologetic questions, like, I don't understand this part of the Bible, or I'm upset about what this church did, there's always a story behind that. Right. And what I try and help people do, and what I personally try and do, is actually let's get to the story before we start setting up arguments, as it were, or formal evidences for faith. Because people want to be heard and they want to be known. They want to know that you're not just out to make another convert. They want to know that you love and care for them and are interested in them. So conversational apologetics is a way of doing that. Ravi has often said, there's always a questioner behind the question. Mm-hmm. And so my job, I feel like, as a human being, and not just as an apologist, is to actually get to know people, to love people, and then to help them get rid of some of those barriers and boundaries that have come up through experience, through teaching, through all kinds of things, so that they can come to know Jesus, hopefully see a little bit of him in me, caring for them and loving them. That's what conversational apologetics is.
Well, I think that's a great approach, but I think a lot of people are even scared to initiate a conversation. I hear people say all the time, faith is a very personal thing. I don't know how to bring it up. I don't even know how to start. So I'm sure there are people who have family members, neighbors, friends, kids, parents, who they want to talk to, but they just don't even know how to bring it up. How do you bring it up?
I think in the same way, I still think there are all kinds of overlaps that we have with people who maybe don't share our faith. Maybe we like the same movies. Maybe we like the same books. I know the arts is a very key way in which I personally like to talk about matters of faith and build those bridges first. Like, did you see that movie? What did you think about this? What questions did that raise for you? Did it raise any questions for you? And I also think in the process of building relationships with people, having people over for meals, sharing meals, of course, is another great way of just getting to know people and building relationships with people. But as you share and you hear people's story, you can find ways to ask questions that don't necessarily get at faith right away, but that provide avenues where those questions of faith and ultimate concern will come up.
Right. So, it could be like, how did you like the chicken? What do you think about Jesus? Like, how do you
I love it.
How do you bridge that really awkward kind of like, how do I get there? Like, walk me through it, because I think a lot of people have been there and they've got friendships with people, but it's like, it's so awkward.
I think in terms of meals, for example, food is a big cultural thing in the U.S., particularly from the region I'm living in currently. It's all about local and sustainable and organic. Right? Bellingham, Washington, Seattle area. We're all into food.
Coffee and local.
And coffee as well, and where it comes from. So if we were sharing a meal together and we were talking about the meal and food and sustainability, one way into that conversation would be, did you know that Jesus spends lots of time eating and drinking in the Gospels, that was one of his favorite things to do, so much so that he was called a wine-bibber and a glutton by the religious leaders of his day? Isn't that amazing? And to come into it even from something as simple as that, or to talk about, why do we care about sustainability? Why is it important? Why is buying local important to you? What does that mean to you? What does that have to do with the stewardship of creation? Why should we be good stewards?
Yeah.
Those kinds of questions.
It's not like, what's your name? Let me tell you about Jesus. But in the context of a very natural, open relationship.
Absolutely.
You start to explore what's important to you. Let me ask you a question. Is family different? Because I think a lot of us can tend to be more open maybe with our friends than we are with our family. And it's like, we just don't talk about religion in our family. Or I tried that once and, everybody walked out, or it got weird.
Yeah, the dynamics of family are interesting, I would have to say. And I can't speak from personal experience on the faith issue because I grew up in a Christian home. So those were very much a part of our family conversation and dynamic. But I have heard that. And I think particularly with family, we have to be very gentle and sensitive because we have all those little life experiences that have built up. Like, I acknowledge I'm a sinner. Yeah, and you did this to me, and you did that to me, and blah, blah, blah. So in other words, our family really sees us for who we are.
Right.
Hopefully, though, they also see how we've been transformed and that we are changing. Maybe it's bit by bit, but I think that family conversations have to be handled particularly sensitively. And perhaps there are other ways to go about that. I know for me personally, there are many times when I've said, this has been a very helpful book for me to read. And rather than just, here, read this, read it first, or say, would you like to read this together? This has been a really cool book. It could be a Christian book that's been very helpful, or it might be even a secular book where there are natural bridges and inroads into talking about Christian faith. So even some things like that can be helpful. And I stress to people that your family members, your friends, your loved ones, all those people that you come in contact with, they need to know that you care about them as a person. And you're going to care about them whether or not they accept faith. And also to take the pressure off yourself. You don't save anyone. I don't save anyone. Yeah. That's the work of the Holy Spirit. I'm to give witness, of course. I'm not to be afraid or ashamed. But ultimately, God is the giver of salvation and gives that gift in time and through a number of different avenues. I think about Paul and talking about what he and Apollos did in their earthly ministries, that Paul sometimes watered, Apollos maybe planted the seeds, but God is the one who gives the growth. So we can trust God with our loved ones, that he is at work and that we will be a part of that work, maybe not the ones who see the harvest, but we can be faithful all along that process.
So as you're having the conversation with people, the question is going to come up. People are going to ask you, one of the great fears, I guess you could put it differently, is that people are afraid they're going to get asked a question that they don't know the answer to, right? You're going to get deep into the conversation with your friend and they're going to say, so, creation or evolution? Let's talk about that. How do you handle that in the context of a conversation?
There is nothing wrong if you really don't know the answer or even where you stand yet. It's perfectly okay to say, I haven't really spent the time necessary to unpack that question or to think about that question. May I go and research it and come back to you? That, if you really are feeling unsure or you don't really know how to go into that question, that is perfectly acceptable. And I actually think people respect that. Because sometimes Christians and sometimes Christian apologists have come off as if we know every answer and we just are ready just like this. And that's not the case. And it's perfectly okay to say, I don't know yet.
Right.
But I will go and find out. I honor the question and I honor you as a person enough that I'll take the time to find out, and I'll come back to you with an answer if you can hold off on that for me. But I do think God's the creator of everything.
Yeah.
How God did it, that's up for a lot of conversation, and let's have a conversation about that. So I think there are ways you can help yourself with that to take the pressure off.
Probably in the middle of the conversation, too, you're going to have people who say, well, that's really great, Margaret. I'm really glad you believe that, and that's probably true for you. That's just not true for me. Is that a conversation killer?
It can be in the short run, but I don't think it has to be in the long run. You can say, okay, I respect where you're at right now, but can we continue this conversation? And can we explore a little bit more of why you've come to that conclusion? And let's see if it still makes sense as you kind of back them up and they can explore their own worldview, their own assumptions that perhaps they've assumed blindly. So I don't think it has to be. I think for some people, you have to leave it at that for that day. But I think there are always ways of saying, let's continue this conversation. I want to know more about how you've come to those conclusions.
Yeah, I love the idea because I think a lot of people end up like deer in the headlights. And it's like, well, the conversation just died. And I guess the issue is closed forever. But to turn the tables, like you said, and say, oh, okay, I totally understand that. But I'd love to be able to discuss this with you again. Or can we come back to that? Or even to pick it up again another day to say, hey, remember that last time when you said that's true for me, true for you? Can we talk about that?
Yes.
And once you talk about it, it's easier to talk about it again,
Absolutely.
as opposed to raising it for the first time.
Absolutely.
So if you have someone who's watching right now or listening right now who is still scared and they're like, I don't even know how to start, is there a place to start that you would recommend and say, you know what, just try this next time?
You know, not everybody is a speaker.
Right.
And is a presenter. That's not the way in which they best use their gifts or offer service. And I really think, in terms of witness.
Sure.
So I really personally believe that you need to know what your gifting is. So for some people, it really is acts of service or works of love or ways in which they come in and care for someone that perhaps is unique or says something and they can say, you know, I do this because I love Jesus and I love you and I want you to see tangibly the love of Christ for you. So it doesn't always have to be everybody has to be an apologist or everybody has to be able to do it this way. I think there are many ways to come at what Jesus himself did. He was constantly healing people. He dealt with the person right in front of his face. He wasn't thinking about, oh, I got to go off and heal Jairus' daughter. No, who touched me? In the crowds of people around him, he wanted to find who that woman was because she acted so boldly in faith. So I really think there are many ways that we can come in and love the person in front of us that don't always have to do with words and with what we say.
Mm-hmm. And that's something, we've had a few conversations at this conference with different apologists who really are not so much into they make the arguments that make us all go, I wish I could say that. But I think every single one so far has said, yeah, but sometimes you just have to say you don't know, and you have to show humility, and they've raised acts of service and like just conversations and questions. And so I think probably evangelism is a lot more natural than we think, and I think you've given a lot of people hope.
Good, I'm glad. I'm glad. I think it's as natural as having conversations and getting to know another person. I really do. And I think when people do that and they take that fear out of it, like people out there in the world are evil or mean or they're out to get me, when you actually get to know people that are not of your faith or your tradition, you come to see, oh, they're a human being just like me, and we have commonalities and bridges and ways in which you can naturally present the gospel to them.
Oh, Margaret, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you
Thanks for
having
being with
me.
us today. Margaret Manning. And I think that's really helped a lot of us. And I think probably one of the challenges we all have is fear. And if you're afraid, I just want to encourage you before you sort of walk away from this conversation, maybe take a moment to pray about that and just say, God, why am I so afraid? And we do actually have people who would love to talk to you about that today. And you can see the prayer line numbers are right here. You can give someone a call, maybe even pray through your fears. And then as you go forward, take a step and actually build a relationship with somebody who doesn't believe what you believe. And I think that's the way the kingdom of God grows.